Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Last Sassanids and the anti-Caliphate alliance with Tang by kings and generals. This is sort of an add-on to our series on early Muslim expansion, where we saw the early Caliphate expand into the territory of the Sassanid Empire and then basically completely defeat them as the Sassanid Empire crumbled to the ground, and the Last Sassanids fled east, and that's what we're going to be seeing in this video. I did not know they had interactions with the Tang dynasty in China. That is very fascinating to me. I'm excited to get into this video. I know I have some fans of my Persian/Iranian history reactions out there. This one's for you guys. I plan to do more Persian history reactions, some publicly on the channel, and some for patrons/channel members. So if you're interested in seeing those, please check out the Patreon and channel memberships for Persian history reactions and other reactions in the future. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. This educational platform has a great offer for our viewers, which you can learn about at the end of this video.
Make sure to go check out their video. Their sponsor, Show Kings and Generals support for making these fantastic videos. Anyway, back into the content.
The Islamic conquest of the Sassanid Empire was one of the defining events in Iranian history, destroying a millennia of Zoroastrian hegemony and depriving the region of a purely native dynasty for the next 900 years.
Wow. I mean, that is a remarkable length of time, and it does seem like it is sort of a turning point for Iran. I'm not sure if I should be using Iran or Persia at this point. I suppose both can be used interchangeably, but it really does seem like this was a turning point. I mean, up until this point, as they said, they have a native dynasty in charge, not to mention Zoroastrianism. That is the most popular and the state religion. Of course, there are Christians, there are Jews, but after this point, we have the rise of the Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate, and primarily, at this point, Arab Caliphate. And they just absolutely crush the Sassanid Empire, take over, and from that point on, for, they said, 900 years, we will have Muslim or Arab Muslim rulers ruling over Iran until we see the emergence of sort of a modern Persian or modern Iranian state. So that's definitely an important turning point.
Instead being dominated by Arabic and nomadic rulers such as the Timurids and Ilkhanate.
Interesting, the Timurids as well, so not just Arabs. We've got a whole collection of peoples.
But the House of Sassan did not die with their empire and lived on in history after the conquest for a century.
I'm very curious to learn about this because in the early Muslim expansion series, we saw the Sassanid Empire crumble and the House of Sassan fled east, and we heard a little bit about them after that, but that was kind of it, right? We didn't get too much more information. So I'm very curious to see where they end up. I mean, looking at the title, somewhere close to China, I would presume, or at least they have contact with China, so very curious.
Constantly trying in vain to regain their lost realm. Welcome to our video on the last Sassanid kings and their adventures in the east. The Sassanid Empire was formed in 224 AD, when Ardashir I defeated
Oh wow, we're going back to the beginning, huh?
the last Parthian monarch at the Battle of Hormozgan before assuming the old Achaemenid title, King of Kings. They were the most powerful Iranian dynasty since the Achaemenids, and went toe-to-toe with the Roman Empire on many occasions.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Romans and the Persians were sort of lifelong rivals. They had been rivals for a long time. Many instances had they fought, they had sort of gone back and forth, though I'd say generally the Romans had the upper hand up until the Sassanid Empire. The Sassanid Empire arises, and not that long after we see sort of the split of the Roman Empire and the collapse of the West. So it's often viewed as the rivals, the Sassanids and the Byzantines. the Persians and the Romans, continuing a very long tradition, but they truly were equal rivals. At times, the Byzantines would get the upper hand. At times, the Sassanids would get the upper hand. They would go back and forth, many great leaders on both sides, but it truly was a pretty intense and very fascinating rivalry.
Often defeating them. They also had to battle nomadic invaders, such as the Hephthalites at their eastern border, and the Huns when they emerged as a threat during the 5th century. Along with their military...
Of course, yeah, both empires spanned massive territories, the Sassanids and the Romans. And so while they were both in competition with each other, both empires had to deal with other states, other tribes, other nomadic enemies who were constantly attacking their borders. And that's a pretty tough thing to defend against when you have such a large amount of territory. You have a lot of territory to defend, right? I think the Romans had a harder time in that respect. I mean, we can see how spread out they were. Though, I guess they had less of that to deal with after the West collapsed, because they lost about half of their territory.
Military endeavors, the House of Sassan presided over an age of cultural flourishing, which climaxed in the reign of Khosrow I Anushirwan.
Okay, and by the way, I plan to do extra credits videos on Khosrow. I want to do a reaction to them, so stay tuned for that. That is coming up, because I've heard about Khosrow. He really seems like one of the great leaders of history, so I'm fascinated to learn a little bit more about him.
With the completion of such masterworks as Shahnameh, along with the construction of a school of learning in Ctesiphon, the empire's capital. But all golden ages must come to an end, and a series of events was about to occur which would lead to the obliteration of Ardashir's Persia.
Ooh.
In 602, Khosrow II attacked the Byzantine usurper emperor Phocas, who had murdered the Persian ally emperor Maurice, beginning the Byzantine-Sassanid War of 602 to...
And this is a common trend we see throughout the histories of these two great empires. You know, they're two empires who have dynasties that rule them, and so at times they're both very vulnerable because of infighting. Someone like Phocas will murder the previous emperor, take over. You'll see civil conflict and civil wars on both sides, and so when the Romans are weak, the Sassanids will slide right in, like, hey, well, it's our time to shine, we're gonna invade. If the Sassanids are weak, the Romans will do the same thing, and, you know, interestingly enough, sometimes when one monarch of one empire is in trouble, they will go to the other empire to help them out. They are rivals, but I guess in some ways they were a little bit like frenemies. You know, sure, they were rivals, but if you're the Roman emperor and you help the Sassanid emperor keep his throne, he's probably going to have at least some allegiance to you, right? So there was sort of an interesting interplay between these two massive empires.
628. The conflict went well for the King of Kings at first, and his empire reached its greatest territorial extent, annexing Syria, Palestine, portions of Anatolia, and the prosperous province of Egypt.
Well, yeah, that is way further than I thought the Sassanids ever got. I mean, this territory has been Roman for quite a while, though, of course, very soon from this point, it's going to be taken by the Caliphate.
Sassanid forces also even managed to lay siege to the Roman capital of Constantinople in 626. However, later on in the war, a capable new Roman emperor, Heraclius, deposed Phocas and reorganized the empire's defenses.
Yeah, so when I say they went back and forth, Heraclius is a great example of this. He was a great Roman emperor. I'm a big Heraclius fan. Maybe we can get more Heraclius content. I really like him. He honestly kind of saved the Roman Empire from the Sassanid advance. Now, I don't know if the Sassanids would have completely destroyed the Roman Empire, but as you can see, they were taking massive amounts of Roman territory. And it was only Heraclius, through his personal leadership of Roman armies, that managed to reclaim a lot of Roman territory and push the Sassanids back. Now, the legacy of Heraclius has been a little bit tarnished because in his later years, he failed to stop the Muslim advance into Roman territory. And, you know, that's fair. That's fair critique, though I'm not sure if anybody could have stopped the Muslim advance in every direction. I still think Heraclius is a great and very impressive emperor.
By 628, all their lost territories had been restored, and multiple Sassanid armies had been destroyed in their Mesopotamian heartland.
Yeah, I mean, we just sort of skipped over that, but think of how remarkable that is from Heraclius. All of the lost territory had been retaken, and he had gone campaigning through the heart of the Sassanid Empire, destroying several Sassanid armies. That's incredibly impressive.
The 26-year-long war had been an unmitigated disaster for both empires, especially for the defeated Sassanids, who descended into a period of factionalism and division which weakened the state even more.
And this is, I think, as we're about to see, probably one of the reasons why the Caliphate was able to expand so quickly and, to be honest, in many ways so easily, because both the Sassanids and the Romans were weakened by this decades-long conflict they had just been in with each other, where, as you can see, the Sassanids had almost toppled the Romans, and then the Romans almost toppled the Sassanids. They'd both done an immense amount of damage to each other, weakened each other up for the Caliphate.
At the climax of the long war, Khosrow, who had suffered many defeats, was ousted by the imperial court in a palace coup, while his eldest son was installed as Kavad II. His short reign was marked by much internal chaos as well as a devastating plague which decimated the empire's population and killed Kavad himself. In late 6th...
Yep, I mean, we've seen how bad plagues can be. Ask Justinian, for example. I mean, it's just, issue on top of issue on top of issue. A plague can be absolutely devastating to your chances of survival as an empire.
628, Kavad's young son, Ardashir III, took the throne, but was then quickly dethroned in 629 by Shah-Baraz, a Persian general in the conflict with the Romans.
Wow.
Soon after, he was dethroned by the Sassanian nobility, and a daughter of Khosrow II, Boran, took power as queen.
I mean, and look, this is not an unusual series of events. If you look at the Roman Empire, they had many instances of a pretty long span of time when it's just emperor after emperor after emperor. No one has any legitimacy. It's all chaos. It's honestly not even who's the most powerful, but just who's in the position at the right time to take the throne. And so you cycle through a bunch of different generals or a bunch of people in some way related to the last legitimate monarch, until eventually you get to someone who could hold the throne for more than a couple of months.
She presided over a short period of stabilization, but was eventually deposed in favor of her sister, Azarmagdukst, who was then murdered by Rostam and was replaced once again by Boran. Finally, in 632, the young Yazdegerd III was installed by the Persian nobility after Boran's murder, and he became the final Shah to rule over the Sassanid Empire.
Yep, and I very much recognize his name because he featured prominently in the early Muslim expansion series. So, here's the guy.
Though he never truly wielded real power. Taking advantage of Sassanid weakness, Muslim armies began to march through Mesopotamia, where they defeated Persian general Rostam at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636.
Yeah, this was a massively important battle. I mean, not to make too many comparisons, but it was kind of like the Sassanids' version of Yarmouk. I mean, Yarmouk was a massively important Muslim victory over the Romans. Al-Qadisiyah was a massively important Muslim victory over the Sassanids. Both battles of quite immense scale.
This defeat broke the back of the Shah's military, and a few months later their capital at Ctesiphon was conquered.
Yeah.
The remainder of those loyal to the Sassanian king retreated beyond the Zagros mountains into Iran. Yazdegerd ordered continuous cavalry raids into the Caliphate territory, and this prompted the Muslims to push east once again. The waning Shah fled from his Muslim pursuers to Hulwan in Media, but soon fled deeper into the Iranian heartland.
And look, I mean, he still does hold a significant amount of territory, but what I learned in the early Muslim expansion series is that he had sort of tenuous control over a lot of the eastern territories of his empire. He had more direct control over the west, which makes sense because that's where the Shah was stationed. And also, something that, I already knew from Roman history is that, Ctesiphon, the area around sort of the western part of the Sassanid Empire, was the most prosperous area of the empire, the most prosperous, wealthy region, where a lot of that important intellectual, military, commercial history had taken place. And, Yazdegerd has been forced to flee that region. He's already lost an immense amount of his power that he once sort of held. Like they said, he never really held the full power of a Sassanid emperor.
He raised another massive army, but it was defeated by the Caliphate at the decisive Battle of Nahevand.
Yep.
After this disaster, Yazdegerd fled to Isfahan and then to Estakir and Kerman, being closely pursued by the attacking Arabs all the way.
Man.
The Shah managed to earn the hostility of both the governor of Kerman and then Sistan.
As you can see, he didn't really have the loyalty of his own governors. And that's what I was talking about when I said he only held sort of tenuous control of a lot of the territory east of the Zagros Mountains.
After moving to join up with the Turks at Merv, it is said that Yazdegerd III was killed by a miller who did not recognize the King of Kings.
Ooh.
Alternatively, it may have been the governor of Merv himself who committed the murder.
Could have been.
However, this was not the end of the House of Sassan, which had previously extended diplomatic relations to all corners of the world long before. Further east, the Chinese Tang dynasty ruled over a...
Now we're getting to China, which, when I saw the title of this video, that was the thing that surprised me the most. I'm very curious to see how the Tang dynasty plays into this.
Prosperous domain of around 50 million people from their capital of Chang'an, probably the largest population in the world at the time.
Yeah.
In the early 5th century...
it's interesting. I don't know too much about Chinese history. I'm certainly not very knowledgeable. I know a lot more about Western and, I guess, Middle Eastern history. They're very closely tied together, and particularly at this period, I know a lot more about Rome, and a bit about the Sassanids and the Caliphate. It's sort of interesting when you're learning about these Western, Middle Eastern empires. China is always, looming in the back. They're so powerful, they have so many people, so influential, but there's like a world of distance between them and Rome. They don't interact too much, but there's just enough interaction that when you're learning about Western or Mediterranean history, you're reminded every so often, yeah, keep in mind, the massively powerful Chinese empire is just doing its thing. And I feel like it might kind of be the same thing if you're learning about Chinese history. It's rather insular. You're learning about China. Every once in a while, you might get a reminder that, the Western world exists.
The Northern and Southern Dynasties period began, when Proto-Mongolic peoples conquered northern China and the core Han dynasty remained in the south. From 455 onwards, regular Sassanid embassies had reached these northern barbaric dynasties, indicating profound knowledge and contact between the two great civilizations. By the time Arabic forces conquered Persia, the Tang had emerged, and they would play a part in what was to come. Dynastic histories show that the Chinese were also well informed about the Sassanid Persians, many of whom lived in the wealthy capital at Chang'an and are represented in Tang literature and sculptures.
Wow, that's fascinating. I do love to see that interplay because, like I said, these are two powers that are pretty far away from each other, particularly if you're going by land. Travel is not very fast at this point, and very different culturally, just existing in very different contexts. So it is always interesting to see whenever those two cultures collide, and you see some cultural or political interplay. Like this art, really, really fascinating.
Yazdegerd III had 2 sons and 3 daughters. Many details are lost about 4 of these 5 children, but the adventure-like tale of Perros and his exiled compatriots is an interesting one.
Alright.
Whilst escaping from the Arabs, the son of Yazdegerd took shelter in Tukharistan in northern Bactria.
And to be honest, I feel like this is... I don't know where this is going, but it already feels like this is more the tale of Perros, his like personal adventure, rather than the tale of the House of Sassan or the Sassanids, because as we can see, the Sassanid Empire almost no longer exists. He's an emperor without an empire at this point. He still has some territory, a lot of influence, a lot of connections, but he doesn't really have territory anymore. And there are examples of this throughout history. We have exiled kings, emperors, leaders, and that's always a very sort of interesting position to be in because you're kind of in limbo. You can continue to fight for your position. I don't know if Perros is going to do that, or a lot of these people just retreat and live their life somewhere else. So that's sort of an interesting thing to do, right?
During a temporary slowdown in the Muslim advance. With the help of local rulers who were still loyal or friendly with the Sassanids, Perros established himself in eastern Sistan province. In 661, the new ruler of the region sent urgent...
Though, considering where the Sassanids are now, they went from an empire that was, its capital was in Ctesiphon, and that's where its most prosperous land was. So a lot of their connection was with the Middle East and the Roman Empire, to now the only territory he holds is bordering on India. So I guess it does make sense that he would have more connection with the Tang dynasty in China, because his only territory is the territory that he held far to the east. And so now he's far more connected to, at least by location, the Asian world than the Middle East or Europe.
Embassies to the Tang requesting military intervention against the invading Muslims. They declined to help take back the empire, but instead, Perros was declared the ruler of the Persian Area Command with a capital at Saranj. In 662, Emperor Gaozong granted Perros the title King of Persia, and so he is regarded popularly as Perros III.
I feel like it's a little... If I was Perros, I feel like I would feel a little patronized. I come from a line of people who were some of the most powerful men on Earth, leading the most powerful empire on Earth. Competition from China and Rome, of course, but I'm sure he would have seen the Sassanid Empire at its height as the most powerful empire on Earth. And now you've been reduced in basically one generation from that to holding this tiny strip of territory which you're being allowed to hold by the Chinese emperor. I feel like I'd feel honestly a little offended by that, but it's not like he can do much else at this point.
The next year, in 663, Arabic forces pushed further to the east and defeated Perros in battle, after which he fled east through the Tarim Basin and arrived at Chang'an during the early 670s.
Well, never mind, he made his way all the way to China. The Muslims kept pushing east, and we know they push very far east. If we look at the Indian subcontinent today, of course, we have Pakistan, which is a Muslim country, so we know that the Muslims pushed as far as they could. Perros was not safe where he was. So now he's fled even further. Now he's not just at the edge of the Indian subcontinent or right at the edge of Asia. He is in China. He's in the Chinese capital. What an interesting story for the House of Sassan.
He appeared at the Tang court on 2 occasions, and Emperor Gaozong received him warmly both times. Either for his service to the Chinese emperor or for his royal station, Perros was appointed the General of the Right Militant Guard. Furthermore, in 677, it is stated that the Sasanian royal asked permission from Gaozong to build a Persian temple in Chang'an, which either served as a Zoroastrian fire temple or a Christian church.
Interesting. I would have thought Zoroastrian. There were certainly a lot of Christians in the Sassanid Empire, but Zoroastrianism was their main religion. I guess we must have conflicting sources, or we don't necessarily know for that to even be a question.
It should be noted that during the late Sassanid Empire, Christians were increasingly tolerated as the empire progressed.
Yeah.
According to the diary of his son, Nasser, In around 679, Perros died of disease and was given a simple burial as he had requested. The entire exiled Sassanian court was in attendance, along with the Chinese ruler himself. The dying Perros held his benefactor's hands, looked west, and said, "I have done what I could for my homeland. I have no regrets."
I mean, hey, he certainly tried his best, right? But against the tide of Muslim expansion, there was very little he could do. I mean, the Roman Empire survived, but they lost a lot of territory. I really don't think anyone could have prevented the Caliphate from expanding as quickly and as far as they did. So, yeah, Perros did what he could, but there was nothing that he could really do. And it is very interesting that the House of Sassan ended up serving in China like this. Like I said, there are other examples of this. I think of the Gaelic aristocrats in Ireland who fled Ireland to continental Europe. A lot of them went to France after the British-English colonization of the island. So this is not necessarily unique. There are other examples of, like I said, exiled emperors or kings fleeing their countries, or even whole courts fleeing their countries to go elsewhere. But it is relatively rare. It's an interesting position to be in, because if you're a ruling class, a ruling dynasty, you never expect to have to flee your territory. Now, Perros sort of grew up with all this going on, but Yazdegerd, he never could have imagined that he would lose his empire and have to, continue to flee east. It's a pretty remarkable thing to do.
Then the Sassanian looked to the east and stated, "I am grateful to China, my new homeland."
Well, that's nice.
After these dying words, he advised all of his attending exiles to contribute their talents to China and to devote themselves to the emperor.
Wow.
Perros then died peacefully, and as a successful Chinese general and a Persian prince, a beautiful horse was made to gallop 33 times around his coffin before burial, as this was the number of victories he had won during his life.
I mean, hey, that's not a bad resume for someone who was forced to flee his own empire and go elsewhere. He seems to have achieved pretty well.
His unfortunately beheaded statue still decorates the massive tomb of Gaozong near Xi'an, possibly indicating the friendship and closeness between the two. Another mutilated statue is near Perros's, representing a man named Nanmei, and it is possible that he was either one of the Persian exiled aristocrats who followed his monarch, or another member of the Sassanian family himself. After the death of his father in 679, Chinese General Pei Xingjian was ordered to accompany the court hostage Nasir west with an army, in order to rescue Persia from Muslim rule.
Okay, well, we know that didn't work out, but I'm curious to see how exactly this goes.
The duo marched west through the Gansu Corridor and Tarim Basin into the area formerly controlled by the Western Turks. They were apparently allied to the Tang, but had in secret been forming friendships with the Tibetan Empire, an enemy of the Chinese. Knowing this, the Chinese general feigned ignorance and expressed a desire to fight a common enemy in the Arabs. However, when the Turks allowed the Chinese to pass through, he took the Turks by surprise and established Tang hegemony in the area once again. Once he had done this, the army abandoned Nasir and...
Okay, so they weren't really interested in taking Persian territory back. I was wondering, wow, they're really going out of their way to help reclaim, the Sassanid Empire. But I guess the Chinese weren't really that interested.
And was only concerned about the reinforcement of the newly regained regions.
But, I mean, hey, if you look at this map, sure, I guess it's not really in the Chinese interest to try and reconquer Persian territory, but at this point, the Tang dynasty does basically border the Caliphate, so they have some interest in fighting back or negotiating with or communicating with the Caliphate. So it's maybe not completely unrealistic that they would want to expand further westward and retake some of that Persian territory.
Information about the grandson of Yazdegerd disappears from the sources almost entirely at this point. but it is almost certain Nasser never reached Persia, and instead fought against the Arabs in the eastern provinces for around 20 years with the help of friendly Turkish chieftains. In 708 he went back to China and eventually died of disease.
I mean, looking at this map, imagine what would have happened if that initial idea was actually taken up. You know, if the Chinese actually took up the Persians' call to reclaim Persian territory for the Sassanids, that would have been quite remarkable. Though I don't imagine that the Tang dynasty would have just let the Sassanids rule it. They probably would have ruled it themselves or had it be a vassal. Imagine Chinese territory extending all the way across the Zagros Mountains. That would have been insane. I mean, yeah, that would have been a crazy land empire. But that's not how it went, so.
While the Muslims finally gained control of all of eastern Iran. A final Sassanian pretender named Khosrow tried to take Persia again in 728 with the help of a Turkish chieftain, but this attempt faded quickly. The remaining Sassanid exiles in China lived comfortably due to the generosity of the early Tang emperors, but the devastating An Lushan rebellion beginning in 755 changed all that, and the money used to fund foreign nobles in the imperial court was cut off.
Yeah.
Shah Khosrow I famously introduced chess to the Middle East, and as you know,
from India, I believe. Alright, that's the end of this one. Make sure to check out Kings and Generals sponsor, show them some support. That was a really interesting one. Obviously, from the title, I knew that the Tang dynasty was going to be involved, but I did not know that the Last Sassanids were so tangled up with China. I mean, they really became more a part of Chinese history by the end, which is really fascinating. It also is a good reminder, because when I think of the Sassanid Empire, I very much think of it in relation to the Roman Empire, because that's what I know far more about. But it's a good reminder that the Sassanid Empire extended, as we saw, all the way to the Indian subcontinent, and so they also had interests far east. Though, to give myself a bit of credit, that western territory around Ctesiphon was the most prosperous territory that the Sassanids held, and they were clearly more interested in the west than the east. So they also sort of viewed it the same way I did. But yeah, that was really fascinating. Like I said, I've got more Iranian history coming up. If you have any other suggestions, apart from what I mentioned, I'm going to react to Extra Credits series on Khosrow. But if you have other suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out the Patreon and channel memberships for exclusive reaction content, including exclusive upcoming Persian reaction content. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.